Welcome back everybody, I am Follygon and this is day 29 of Sculptober, a month-long sculpting challenge where I create something new every single day for the month of October. Today's prompt is Squish and I'm going to be creating Stitch from Disney's Lilo and Stitch. Before we get in and talk about the process though, if you are new around here, click that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about digital sculpting like what I'm doing here, check out gumroad.com/Follygon. You can also download some things like my brushes, base meshes, and materials over there as well. Starting off with just a basic sphere for the head, as well as a couple pieces for the nose and ears to begin stretching those into place. I start off by using a lot of pinch brushes on this one, which is something that I typically do, but not quite to this extent. His head is essentially a sphere, but I need to mark out those kind of harder plane changes now, a little bit more exaggerated than what they'll be for the final, but just to make sure that I have them in the correct place. It's kind of like doing a rough sketch here at first. You just want to figure out where things are going to be. It doesn't need to be absolutely perfect at this point. It's more so just making sure that you have something there to represent that spot. So for instance, the eyes or the eye cavity, which is a very shallow recession in the form here, is just kind of sketched on to make sure that I have something basic there to make sure I have a place to put the eyeball, which is absolutely massive. You'll notice that they're actually so large, in fact, that they are merging together inside of the head. This is something that is actually a lot more common than you may think for stylized characters. I've briefly touched on it in a couple other Sculptober videos. We just haven't had a very good example of that actually happening here until today's sculpt. So I have to be really careful that I don't mess up that area in between the eye. If I kind of adjust those with symmetry on right now, which is why I've deleted one of them, it will cause all that geometry to get completely messed up on the inside. So when I do duplicate that eye over to the other side, instead of having them inside of one subtool, which is what that individual kind of list of items I have over on the right is, I have to keep those separated so that when I adjust one, it's only working on one and not both at the same time. Some characters have eyes so large that when you try to create them in 3D, they will often poke outside the head as well. Luckily, we didn't have that going on here, so I was able to adjust those in such a way to get them into a workable state, but obviously still having that issue with them merging together in the middle. I have to be careful around there. Then after most of the primary forms are in place, I can go about painting my character very quickly. He doesn't have a ton of complexity going on with his paint, so only a few colors here for the head, the kind of lighter areas around the face for the underside of the mouth, as well as the eye sockets, and then that nice kind of desaturated pink for the inside of the ears. For the eyes, they're not just pure black. I actually painted in a little bit of this dark blue color around the bottom area. It's something that's featured in most of the 2D illustrations for the character, so I wanted to include it here. So it's definitely feeling like Stitch, but some of the little parts and pieces are off just by a little bit. So it could be something small like the shape of an eye, or something like the angle of the ears, or the proportions of the ears. Just the tiniest little tweak on something like this can make it feel really off, which is why you have to be really careful when you have these more simplistic characters. Even the smallest tweak can make a huge difference. Then it's on to stretching out the face around those cheeks. I am going to be creating a couple hands here to be pinching on the cheeks and kind of like pulling them out. He's got to feel nice and squishy, so I figured that would be a fun way to illustrate that. So I start by using an insert hand brush of a few different hands that I've created in the past. I didn't want to take the time to create a nice clean hand today. I didn't really have time for that for a daily sketch, so I'm repurposing and reusing one that I've already created from a previous sculpt. And I'm very glad that I did that because it took a long time just to make this very simple hand pose here. Hands are very difficult, whether you're talking about sculpting them from scratch or simply posing one like I'm doing here. And that is because hands have a lot of character. There's a lot of complex shapes going on there, a lot of moving and working parts in terms of anatomy, the bones and joints of the hand, and working with all of that together to make that hand feel believable as well as look nice from every single angle. Of course, we are 3D artists. We gotta make sure that's working out. That is not an easy thing. But if you guys are interested in learning more about sculpting hands, I will put a link to a nice tutorial here up on screen from a live session that I did not too long ago where I spent a couple hours creating a couple nice hands. So check that out if you're interested, and we'll continue on here with this hand. I'm using polygroups right now to create different selections so that it's just a little bit easier for me to manipulate these. A lot of people ask me questions about creating, rigs for animating characters and stuff like that. I'm not sure how familiar those people are with those types of workflows, but for that kind of thing, I would have to leave ZBrush completely, create a rig, and then animate that hand or whatever I'm working on in another piece of software, and then translate that all back here to ZBrush. But for me, it's just a million times faster when I have this high poly dense mesh with subdivision levels natively here in ZBrush, and I can just create some quick masks and rotate and manipulate that object. There are ways to create simple rigs inside of ZBrush with what are called Z-spheres. I'm not really a huge fan of them. They create what are called automatic skin weights, and you don't really have too much control over that, for those that are familiar with skin weighting. So I'm not a huge fan of that process. I prefer just having absolute control over my form and over the polys that I'm manipulating. The only time I would create a rig for a character or a hand or whatever is if I was going to animate that later on. Because it's not just creating a rig, you would also have to retopo and create some really nice clean geometry for that piece to make sure that it's deforming properly for the rig. And that includes setting up things like skin weights and everything else. It's just a long and complicated process, especially when you compare it to something like what I'm doing here with these hands in ZBrush. So I've stretched out the face, I've added a little bit of asymmetry as well. I'm working on that a little bit more, doing some things like manipulating the mouth, making him feel just a little bit less sad. I felt like with the mouth, the way it was feeling previously, it was feeling a bit flat, and it was kind of making his expression feel a bit unhappy, but we still want him to be feeling cute and happy and having that cute little smile on his face. Definitely a subtle expression here, but for a daily sculpt, that's kind of what we have time for. I thought briefly about opening his mouth, but looking at the clock, I was kind of a little short on time today for the daily sculpt, so this was just a little bit faster. Then to finish things up, I add in all the small little details. This includes adding things like some tears or kind of ripped areas to the ears. For that, I use live booleans. I essentially take a cube, slot that into place, and then subtract that from the ear. And then that also includes little things like the hair on top of the head. For this, I use the curve tube snap brush, something that I talked about in the last video when creating BMO. I used this exact same brush to create his arms and legs, and even talked about how I like to use it for hair. So a really great example of where we get to see that being applied right in the next video. So after using the move brush, some masking tools, and things like backface masking to manipulate that hair a little bit further, give it a bit more asymmetry and character, I go ahead and merge that into a slice of the head. The reason I didn't merge that into the original piece is because I didn't want to mess up the geometry that I had there. I prefer to just duplicate the area where I'm going to merge that into, just so I can begin blending that shape a little bit better. And then later on, if I want to make that into one piece of geometry, I can of course take the time to merge those back together. The last little step here is giving him some quick nostrils. For that, I use the mask lasso tool, create the basic shape of the nostril, adjust the mask slightly, and then push that area up and into the nose. It doesn't need to be far because I'm going to be adding some darker color there to make it appear deeper than it actually is. And just like that, we have a nice squishy stitch. Hey, if you are new around here, click that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about digital sculpting, check out gumroad.com/Follygon. There you can find things like my brushes, courses, and materials. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have been enjoying Sculptober. I definitely have, but we only have a couple of these left, so make sure you come on back tomorrow and the next day, starting off with tomorrow's prompt, Sting.